Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to have the opportunity to share some of my story with you. To start, I want to share a little bit about who I am and how I identify. My name is Rachael. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a very proud member of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And I'm also of mixed Indigenous descent. I am Métis and Mi'kmaq on my mother's side, with roots in Eel River, New Brunswick, and Red River, Manitoba. I'm also Dutch on my father's side. When I start thinking and reflecting on my identity and how I present myself to the world and how to share that with all of you, it only makes sense to start at the beginning, where I began to form my understandings of interpersonal relationships and community. I grew up in a home that was much different than most of my friends. I experienced multiple forms of abuse and suffered through complex trauma. Because of those experiences, I had extremely low self-esteem and self-worth, and I suffered greatly with my mental health. My family was also very religious growing up, so to combat some of these negative emotions, I leaned heavily into my faith. My faith became my escape and my solitude and my safe place. In the moments when I felt completely lost, my relationship with God became something tangible that I could hold on to until that storm was over, or until I could finally breathe again. But as I got older and I started to realize that I was queer, I was devastated by the thought that God and my congregation could never accept me for who I was as a whole person. My faith was shaken to its core, and I felt completely lost, isolated, and alone. Over the years I'd spent in church and reading faith-based literature, there was always this recurring theme of these feelings you're having don't necessarily make you a sinner, but acting on these feelings will. So the messages that I was receiving were telling me, you may think you're gay, but you're not. You just have to take the gay and shove it really far down inside of you and pretend that part of you doesn't exist. Pretending that part of me didn't exist fractured my identity. I felt like I was constantly playing this role, like I was lying to myself. I was lying to God, and I was lying to everyone around me. And let me tell you, that doesn't help with feelings of negative self-worth or isolation whatsoever. The struggle with my faith was hands down the most difficult barrier that I faced coming out of the closet. I was terrified that I'd be abandoned and unloved by something so central to how I survived in the world. Eventually, though, I had to make that decision that I couldn't fight these feelings anymore. And I started to gather up the courage to come out to some of my friends and family. I remember the exact moment that I came out to my mom. We were casually sitting in a McDonald's drive-thru, and I just blurted out the words, "Mom, I'm gay. And I'm gonna be gay whether you like it or not." It had this whole angsty teenage vibe to it. So my mom, she took a second, and then she calmly and lovingly said, "Okay." But then she said something that shook me, and it shook the identity that I was so desperately trying to reconcile. She said, "Rachael, do you think that the abuse that you suffered has anything to do with these feelings you're feeling?" And in that moment, I was crushed. I felt like the abuse that I'd suffered, that had affected so many different parts of my life, was now tainting yet another piece of my identity. Now, I want to take a second to emphasize that my mom and I have talked about this moment at great length. And I know in my heart that she was just trying to look out for me in any way that she thought was helpful, even though it wasn't. My mom has always been my biggest fan. So I know this came from a place of love, but what I needed in that moment was safety, security, and acceptance. I also want to point out that after this moment, my mom and I talked openly and honestly about my sexuality in a healthy and positive way. She became one of my greatest allies. I told her all about my hopes and my fears, my crushes, and all my drama-filled breakups. Coming out to some of my friends was, for the most part, pretty easy. A lot of them honestly just sort of laughed and said, like, Rachel, I know. It doesn't change anything. Those moments were so affirming for me. All I needed from them was that genuine acceptance, as if nothing had changed at all. However, some of my friends weren't as supportive. I never had anyone outright call me out or vocalize that they couldn't accept me and my queer identity. But some of them slowly started to distance themselves from me, and that hurt tremendously. For someone struggling with feelings of negative self-worth, these actions made me feel like less than a person, as if somehow my value had been reduced as a human being even further when I was labeled gay. It was around this time that I was starting high school, and I was about to go through some of the most difficult chapters in my journey. In school, I was always visibly different. Despite rigid Catholic school uniforms, I always dressed differently. I never wanted to wear girls' clothes, and honestly, people didn't like it, and they made fun of me for it. Even in a classroom setting directly in front of the teachers, some of these kids would crack gay jokes, and then the whole class would just laugh with no repercussions. It was because of this bullying I was experiencing, my struggles with coming out, that loss of support from my faith, and my deep suffering with my mental health, that I tried to end my own life. I felt completely hopeless. I felt like a burden and an outcast to everyone around me. And I felt like those dark days in my life had never really let up, right from the beginning. And I just couldn't take it anymore. Thankfully, my attempt was unsuccessful, and I'm still standing here today. But it wasn't easy. It took a lot of hard work to get my feet back on solid ground after that day. Through support from my mom and some of my closest friends, I managed to string together some good days and a little bit of self-confidence. And I'm forever grateful for that opportunity. I switched to homeschooling for about a year to work on my mental health. But when I did return in person, I immediately streamed out of academic courses and into the applied stream. I wanted to be closer to some of my friends who were an integral part of my safety net. But this was also in response to what continued to be a hostile school environment. The attitude of some of these students and the staff was, if you don't fit into these boxes of what people consider normal, then you're inherently worthy of mistreatment. To combat this, my teen years became more about being social and being accepted by other people, as opposed to my behavior and my education. I acted out a lot in school, and I got myself into a lot of trouble. I actually ended up getting kicked out, and I entered into an Indigenous diversion program through the Niagara Regional Native Center. I really wasn't sure what to expect from this program, but I was dreading another unsupportive environment. What I found instead was a sense of community. They helped me through counseling, spiritual guidance, anger management, and community service. This program was also one of the ways that my mother began to walk her journey back home to her Indigenous community. In her early life, my mother experienced the detriments and the trauma of the 60s scoop. She was taken from her home community and placed with an Irish Catholic family. The goal of this was to assimilate her into Canadian society. And because of that, she lost her history her culture, and her community. Fortunately, as an adult, she was able to reconnect with her birth mother and start to walk that journey back home. And through my diversion program, she was able to foster those roots to her community. And she's become a very active member of that community as well. This part of our family history is very important because through watching my mother reconnect and learning from her through that process, I've also been able to begin that journey myself. Understanding our family's history of intergenerational trauma has really helped me to reconcile with some of the things that have happened throughout my life. As I got older, I started to figure out what worked for me and what made me feel safe and secure in my identity. I worked hard on my mental health, and I still do every single day to make sure that I'm taking care of what Rachael needs. Working on my mental health includes every part of who I am. My community, my sexuality, my indigeneity, my self-esteem, and my self-confidence. It's also important for me to mention that another significant part of my healing journey happened when my partner and I took in my niece and 2 nephews due to some extremely unfortunate circumstances. These kids were struggling with a lot of the same things that I struggled with growing up. And so I was forced to take a long, hard look in the mirror and decide that this was when that generational pain comes to an end. I had to make the decision to live my life in the healthiest way possible for their sake and for mine. The day they came to live with us was the day I started to find those missing pieces of my healing journey. Part of that healing means that I'm always very careful that the people I allow in my life are healthy for me and that they lift me up and accept me wholeheartedly and that they align with who I am and my values. That has been a huge learning. The people I surround myself with have a lot to do with why I've been able to overcome so much of what I've overcome in my life. And today, I have the confidence to walk into any room, anywhere, and be unapologetically myself. I'm here, I am super queer, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Hey, buddy! It's because of that confidence and my strong sense of community that I've also been able to make some massive changes in my life. I walked away from my career, and I finally went to university to study social work. That's something that I never thought was possible because of my experiences in high school. And so I say to allies, friends, and family of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, when someone chooses to come out to you, they've chosen you for a reason. What you say and how you respond has impact and value that you may not fully understand. So treat those moments with all the care, compassion, and empathy that you can. Teachers, speak up when you hear discriminatory remarks in your classroom. When I switched streams due to the bullying that I was experiencing, that had immense impact on my academic career. And it should have never been the case. If even one of those teachers had stepped in, stepped up, and stopped the homophobic attacks on me and some of the other students in my school, our journey to post-secondary would have looked a lot different. Before I leave, I'd like to part with one last message for anyone out there who might still be struggling. I want you to try and never lose faith in who you are and know that you hold so much value in the world. Find the people around you that lift you up and lift your spirit and hold on to them because love and community are incredibly powerful. Powerful enough to break the cycles of trauma, reclaim your identity, and give hope and strength to future generations. Thank you.